And welcome to the debate right here on France 24. In France, the parliamentary elections are almost seen as a simple procedure that confirms the president's hold on power with a majority in parliament, a result of the fact that the poll takes place just a few weeks after the presidential election. Will this year be different? Emmanuel Macron secured his second term as president fairly comfortably with over 58% of the vote in the second round, but this may have been less of an endorsement and more of a resigned move to block the far right. One thing has changed, though, in the past few weeks. An unexpected alliance on the left, the awkwardly named Nupes, finally bringing together the disparate elements of the left. The France Unbowed movement to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the Communist Party, the Greens, and the Socialists, all under the same umbrella, and with the gambit of making Jean-Luc Mélenchon the next prime minister. And momentum appears to be on their side. The latest Ipsos Sopra Steria poll, as you see, showing the left-leaning alliance leading in vote intentions ahead of the first round, 28% against 27% of Macron's Ensemble coalition, and Nupes making it through to the second round for 10 out of 11 seats representing French expatriates, those votes already taking place in earlier weeks. Well, that picture different at the end of the second round, though, that poll showing Ensemble holding on to their majority with anywhere between 260 to 300 seats against 175 to 215 for the leftist alliance, but lots of uncertainty with many tight races and uncertainties over vote transfers in the second round. Let's see, for a point of comparison, what the seating arrangement looks like in the National Assembly right now. That picture should be coming up shortly. So you see there La République En Marche, Macron's leading party, holding a very sizable minority. If you compare it with the previous graphic, that would be considerably or a little bit lessened. So can Macron hold on to this majority that we just saw? What's in the way? Will people show up at the polls? We've got a great panel to discuss this with you. We have Lex Paulsen, who is a former campaign advisor for Emmanuel Macron during the 2017 presidential run, and also the director of the School of Collective Intelligence at UM6P in Morocco. Richard Verley is also here. He's the France and Europe correspondent for Swiss newspaper Blick. And also joining us from London, Charlotte Marviel, a Nupes candidate looking to represent French people living in Northern Europe. She actually successfully made it to the second round of that legislative election. She'll be pitted against a candidate from the ruling coalition. As well, joining us is Max Bégon, the UK representative for the National Rally in the far right, the Marine Le Pen's party. Thank you, all of you, for being with us. The first challenge for all the parties involved, mobilizing voters. That Ipsos poll showing just 46% of respondents said they were going to vote on June 12th, down from 48.7% participation in 2017, which already was a historic low. The government's bet to get people interested in politics again is the National Council for Refoundation, which will be set up after the elections, putting together people and institutions from all walks of life without partisan bias to discuss the issues of the day in a new forum. This is a not-so-subtle reference to the National Council of Resistance set up in World War II to combat Nazi occupation, which was headed by famed resistance fighter Jean Moulin. Let's listen to what government spokesperson Olivier Grégoire had to say about that new Council for Refoundation.
So it is broader in terms of gatherings than the individual chambers, and the idea is that we gather together to do better, even if each body contributes, starting with the European Economic and Social Committee, to improving democratic practice. But this is not enough when we see the withdrawal and abstention, the distance of our compatriots.
So let's start with you, Richard. Can this really, this initiative of this new council really breathe new life into French politics, or do you see this as just another announcement made during a campaign?
Well, it's been welcomed by a lot of doubt. If you read the newspaper, if you listen to the TV or radio, a lot of experts are saying that this is just a political manipulation from Macron right before the election. He wants to come up with some idea to please the French people who wants more participation. I'm actually personally a bit more optimistic, probably because I'm half Swiss, and you know we love direct democracy in Switzerland, but the idea to have a panel with some French citizen drawn, to participate and to be able to voice their opinion alongside elected officials or bureaucrats seems to me quite a good idea. Now, it should not compete with the National Assembly and the Senate. And that's going to be the question, because we are going to have a parliamentary election. And very soon after, if you convene such a council, then those elected MP will say, why are those people sitting? We have been elected to draw policies in France. So I'm a bit afraid of the competition between this so-called Council of Refoundation and the new National Assembly, especially if Mélenchon wins, especially if the opposition is very strong in that National Assembly. But still, having French people more involved, I believe, is a good idea.
Lex Paulson, this is almost like a textbook Emmanuel Macron move, who always looking to sort of break party lines, to sort of think outside the box, to propose new formats. But is this really the way to get French citizens re-engaged with political life?
Well, Macron, I think, is a careful student of French history. He knows that as revolutionary as French politics have been over 2 centuries, they can be also deeply conservative. And the paradigm that governed France since 1945 relied on a stable center-right and a stable left-wing party, and it relied on the parties having the trust of their electors. Now, both of those things have been completely obliterated. The first by Macron himself in 2017 with the creation of En Marche Party and the subsequent collapse of the center-right Républicain and the Socialist Party. And the second factor is, in the age of the internet, political parties in general have struggled to convince voters that they are representing their interests, that voters are much more flexible. Citizens want to participate in real time, not just once a year, not just sending a little bit of information through a political party, but by sharing their ideas, sharing what they're seeing in their neighborhoods, sharing their talents, sharing their preferences, as the Swiss do many times a year. But I think we can, in France, see, as you say, the principle of the lottery can go beyond just voting by mail, which is the way most Swiss citizens do it, but in bringing people together in deliberative assemblies, which is what Macron did with the climate convention. It showed that 150 people who are not the elite, who are not the graduates of the elite grandes écoles, can still create real interesting ideas guided by experts in complementarity with the institutions. But the problem is, if the Assemblée and the Senate keep all of the decision-making power, then the citizens will know that it's a facade. And so there has to be some renegotiation of power with this new Conseil de Refondation and the existing institutions. You can't simply say, we want to bring in citizen voices, but you'll have no final power over the decision. That is what made the climate convention such a controversial topic, that the citizens did not feel listened to. So if you want to listen to citizens, you have to somehow integrate into the system and not just do it for show.
Well, I'm going to turn to some of the people who actually have direct ties with parties that are involved in French political life, starting with maybe Charlotte Mainvielle from the Nupes. What are your thoughts on this council in general? What has the leftist alliance under the umbrella of Jean-Luc Mélenchon done to get voters reinterested in politics?
Yes, well, first of all, I think the word facade was used here, and I'm quite skeptical about this new initiative, really, because yes, we've seen with the Citizens' Assembly on Climate that actually the recommendations of citizens weren't listened to. 150 citizens came together, reflected for 8 months during lots of weekends, took a lot of their time, and actually only 10 of their suggestions were given to Parliament without being modified. All of the others, half of them were dropped. So it was a real failure, actually, and they only the Citizens' Assembly only gave a grade of 3 out of 10 to the climate law that came out in June last year. So I think it's good to try and do these initiatives, and we absolutely have to engage citizens in our politics and in our democracy. But then, if they're not listened to, what's the point? And I think it's as it was mentioned, we have to think about how we can also revisit our democracy. One of the things that we're suggesting in our program is a sixth republic, where actually this presidential system is less powerful and there's more power to a parliamentary system. A lot of other European countries function that way, where actually I think it means that parliamentarians have more of a say and citizens feel more engaged. Because I think in this case, this initiative has the risk of being quite tokenistic, because we know that there's a lot of words that come from and have come from this government, but actually in terms of listening, in terms of having real accountability, that really hasn't been the case.
Max Bégon, what about the national rally and all of this? Would you support this kind of new republic, a new institution that would encourage further participation?
Well, we are in favor of a major institutional reform, which is to make parliamentary elections proportional. This measure was in the program of Nicolas Sarkozy in 2007. It was in the program of François Hollande in 2012. It was in the program of Emmanuel Macron in 2017. And it was never implemented. So I think it's very hypocrite from Mr. Macron to create a Council of Refundation while not even following up on his own presidential promise of making the parliament proportional. And I think one of the main reasons of lack of interest from the French people at the moment is that they see a parliament that doesn't reflect the diversity of the views that are in the country. And when you have the National Rally, which had, which was the first party in the European elections in 2019, which only had 10 MPs in the legislative elections 2017, it's very hard for their voters to fully engage with the process.
Lex Paulsen, we heard it earlier. There seems to be this reputation with Emmanuel Macron of giving the appearance of wanting to engage in dialogue, of wanting to hear ideas from all sides, but in the end, just going with what his gut says. Your reaction to that?
Well, this is a problem in politics, is that if you already identify with one side, you assume the worst intentions of the head of state. I think that Emmanuel Macron, frankly, coming out of the crisis of the yellow vest, of the gilets jaunes, coming out of the somewhat improvised experience of the Grand Débat, the Great Debate, which showed, if nothing else, that the French want to participate. Where I really differ with both the National Rally and the Nupes proposal is that, to me, I don't think that having a greater emphasis on the representative principle, on representative parliaments, is what the average citizen wants. The average citizen thinks that the Paris elite has dominated governance for far too long in this country. They want more decentralized control, less influence from Paris, and more direct participation in the form of local citizens' assemblies, in the form of participatory budgets, in the form of local consultations. There are many ways that citizens can get involved. No other party is talking about that. I will say Macron, he hasn't yet achieved the ideal, but I really do think there is a part of him and a part of his government that does believe it. There are a lot of counterwinds, though, and I think there's a lot of people who are hypocrites, who do talk about citizen participation and actually believe in experts and elites. But I think what we're seeing is, once you put citizens in a position where they can share their expertise, this dichotomy between experts and citizens break down. Citizens can be experts too. In fact, citizens are often giving vital expertise that politicians are missing. And that is what Macron is taking steps toward. He hasn't gotten there yet, but this Conseil de Fondation, if it really brings in everyday people and not just the usual suspects, the labor unions, the association leaders, if they really bring in average citizens, this will be another big step towards reforming French democracy.
Yeah. Well, Richard Worley?
Yeah, my belief is Macron is facing three real problems when it comes to this proposal of a National Council for Refundation. The first problem is credibility. I mean, the lady rightly said so. If you bring in citizens, and I am for it, and I think it's a good news. But if you bring in citizens, you've got to make sure that what they're going to say will be somewhat implemented, and you will have results. And sorry to say, but the national debate was a success in terms of hearing the French people, but it was a disaster in terms of drawing the lesson from what they said. So the great national debate, you can see it both ways. It was after the crisis of the yellow vest. You can say Macron decided to hear the people. Well, good news. He went there. He had a number of meetings. But what was the outcome afterwards? So first problem is credibility. Second problem he has is the timing. To propose that right before an election, make it suspicious for everyone. And the third problem is the lottery in itself. If you decide to trust the lottery to bring in citizen drawn in, you've got to make sure that they represents all spans of life and not only the one that you want to hear. So it means you need to have arch conservative, you need to have leftist, you need to have moderate people. So make sure the lottery is proper.
Well, Charlotte Mainvielle, one of the ways that Emmanuel Macron tried to get people interested in again after his re-election was to name a new cabinet, to have a new prime minister in the form of Elisabeth Borne, the first female prime minister since 1991, I believe. And this was supposed to turn a new leaf. He promised a new method. And then quite quickly, we've had scandals. We've had Damien Abad, the Minister for Solidarity, accused of rape. We've had as well the Elisabeth Borne herself on the radio telling a handicapped caller that she could just get a job in order to be able to live better. This contributes to further cynicism about the political class.
Totally. I think, of course, as women in politics and really in favor of women being in leadership, I thought it was a good symbol, of course, to have a woman prime minister. But then I think it's also when you look at the composition of this government, actually their actions are deplorable. As you said, the way Elisabeth Borne spoke to that disabled person, saying that maybe she should just get back to work, really bringing her to tears, shows, I think, the real disconnect and the real lack of sensitivity and the real arrogance that some of these ministers have. And you have mentioned as well the minister Damien Abad, who has two women who have accused him of rape. And I think in a lot of other countries, including countries that I'm looking to represent in Northern Europe, like Scandinavia, for example, a minister would never stay in that position having done what he's done or being accused of doing what he's done. And I think, even if you look at our Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, he's been kept in post, and we've seen what a disaster the situation has been with the football game at the Stade de France, and how the Liverpool fans have been treated with violence. I think there's big issues in terms of too much use of violence by the police. And in comparison, we can see in the UK that police is less armed, that there's a separation between the institution that controls the police and the police, which is not the case in France, with the IGPN being within the police, so the police controlling the police. So I think, yes, this government, if you look at the Prime Minister, the Minister Damien Abad and Gérald Darmanin, there's a lot of issues. There's very little, actually, renewal. And I think Emmanuel Macron has adopted a real posture of arrogance, really, because he's been elected thanks to the votes of the progressive left, of the Greens, the Socialists, Mélenchon's party, and it seems like he's really forgotten that and continued his acts, completely axing his politics clearly to the right, both in what he's doing and also with the choices of who he's putting in power.
Max Bégon, all those various controversies we've been talking about, do you feel like the National Rally can benefit from this more, for instance, than the Nupes alliance? How do you see this playing out in the polls?
Well, we've been complaining about laxism and, generally a police that is not listened to, and a very loose approach to crime. And we've seen the concrete results in this Stade de France event. So it's really sad, because it's exposing how low France has come in terms of ensuring the security of its citizens. Because this is a world event. You would expect that it's well prepared, and the French government was not able to protect the people who were there to just watch their team. And the cynicism with which the Interior Minister accused the English supporters of being responsible is really unacceptable. So we've always campaigned on law and order. You can see in the cities that are held by the National Rally that the streets are clean, the streets are safe. And so when on the other side you have Mr. Mélenchon with constantly criticizing the police, I think we stand more to benefit, of course, from that kind of event.
Charlotte Maviel, you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised by this kind of discourse from the far right, but I think actually these elections have been dominated way too much by this kind of discourse of over security, of anti-immigration discourse, and I think actually the fact that the far right has given up on having any majority or even a good success of having good MPs in Parliament is good news for us, because a lot of their discourse is around hatred, anti-immigration, lack of solidarity towards refugees. And I think, yes, it's also manifested by the way they see the role of the police and lack of respect to citizens. I mean, we need to remember that in the last 4 months, 4 people have been killed just by resisting, the police in a way that doesn't deserve being killed. This girl was only 21 years old that we're talking about. So I think we really need to change and improve our policing system and have it much more closer, like community police, and training the police and reinforcing their capacity. But we also need to think about accountability in that sphere.
Right. Let's move on to the second part of this conversation. Out of all this, the left seems to be the gaining momentum, as we saw in the earlier polls at the beginning of the show. In a historic move, the various parties of the left of France's political spectrum have come together in an effort to win a majority and derail President Macron's plans for his second term. Let's have a quick look at this story by Monty Francis.
Emmanuel Macron may have won the presidency, but now his agenda is on the line. He's facing a unified challenge from the political left in the legislative elections. The leaders of the France Unbowed Party, the Socialists, the Ecologists, and the Communists have formed a coalition that they're calling the Nupes. It's an acronym standing for Nouvelle Union Populaire Écologique Sociale, or in English, the New Popular Ecological and Social Union. Their objective is simple: to come out on top with a majority in the National Assembly, to block Macron's agenda, and to advance their own. The leader of the Communist Party even taking the campaign door to door.
Macron would be president of the rich, and our coalition on the left, we would raise salaries, change the retirement age to 60, and provide stipends for students.
By winning a majority in the Assembly, the left-wing coalition is hoping to force Macron's hand into appointing a prime minister from outside his own party. The leader of the France Unbowed Party, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, came in as a close third in the first round of the presidential election, and now he's aiming for the second spot.
I'm asking the French people to elect me prime minister. I'm asking them to elect me prime minister by electing a majority of deputies from France Unbowed and from the Popular Union.
But support for the new Popular Union is not across the board. Several small environmental parties have come out against the left-wing coalition and have thrown their support behind 250 outside candidates in the legislative elections.
Emmanuel Macron has shifted his campaign to respond to this new challenge from the left. The French president speaking this Thursday and raising the specter of chaos if his majority doesn't hold, and also trying to represent some form of unity in the country.
I'm convinced that being faced with those who want to oppose and divide, the French people will choose unity. They will choose to overcome the divisions, which I have been saying since day one, and I want to keep doing that by bringing people closer to the decision-making process, by bringing local officials closer together, and all of the vital sparks of the nation to make them stronger.
Richard Rowley, Mélenchon campaigning on this idea of becoming the next prime minister. It's kind of genius in a way. It really signified and really was the defining feature of this campaign. The choice in the end actually will be the president's. He can't decide. It's not entirely up to him. What's the point of tying the left-wing votes to that singular personality, especially one that hasn't been always so unanimous?
Well, you've got to keep in mind how the French political system works. The French political system is a presidential system. So you need to have, if you want to win, you need to have unity and you need to have a leader. It has always worked like that. And I think where Mélenchon clearly did a perfect move after the presidential election, he managed to send the whole part of the left the same message. If we are not united, and if you are not united behind me, because I gathered 7.7 million of votes, if I'm correct about Mélenchon votes at the first round of the presidential election, then he said that, and people went, and people from the Socialist Party, Green Party, went alongside. I think that's a perfect move. Now, the big question Mélenchon has to answer is whether this brings really a radical change to the political landscape. And there I have a doubt. I think the Mélenchon candidate, maybe our friend, is a proof of that because she's qualified for the second round, because the French voters from abroad voted for the first round last week. He will clearly have a lot of candidates making it to the second round. Now the difficulty for Mélenchon is he may face at the second round the unity against him. So people from the conservative voters, moderate voters, center-left who disagree with this alliance, they may unite together to avoid Mélenchon becoming the prime minister. So in a way, he bet on himself being the leader, but he can also be the one that people vote against, and that may result in a lot of his candidates losing for the second round.
Charlotte Mainvielle, the divisions in the left are not entirely gone. Dissident socialists actually looking to invalidate how the Parti Socialiste, the Socialist Party, agreed to join the Nupes alliance, and they've had the agreement of a judge actually about that. Will the old demons of the fractured left come back to haunt them, or is this really a step into a new direction?
I think this is a step into a new direction, and I think it's a step that was very much expected and hoped for. We know that from the presidential elections, actually, voters were really hoping for us to use. It's incredible, actually, what we've achieved to do, what we've managed to achieve, really, because it's something that was really hoped that we would manage to do, and it hadn't been done in decades. So I think actually it creates the fact that the dynamic is very much, and the trend is very much in favor, because it's impulsed something new, something historical, and I think it's brought a lot of people together. And actually, a lot of people are tired with the inaction, both in terms of social justice and in terms of the environment, of what's been done in the past 5 years. France has been condemned for climate inaction. It's also the only European country that didn't respect its own commitments in terms of investment in renewable energies. People currently are struggling to pay their energy bills. They're struggling to pay their food shopping because inflation is at its highest level since the past 40 years. So they're waiting for some change, I think, and this trend of that we're getting is very positive. And I think that actually we see that a lot of the MPs, the current MP in my constituency, had a drop of 20% since 2017. So the gap between us has very much narrowed, and we have a real chance of winning these elections. And I think they're quite afraid of that, which is why they're caricaturing a lot of our propositions. There's an article in the media that came out yesterday saying that all of these different ministers are simplifying and caricaturing a lot of our propositions. So I think really we're in a very strong position, and this has strengthened us. And of course, we are allowed to keep our identities within our parties, but we have a common ground, which is around the environment, social values, and really trying to have a strong Europe that protects our citizens in terms of environmental and social issues and human rights issues.
Lex Paulson, we've seen in this campaign, with this new government that Isabelle Borne, a lot of emphasis on cost of living measures, saying the first bill that will be presented to the new parliament will have to do with helping French people with their pocketbooks. In a way, policies that really would appeal to that Nupes electorate. Is there not a risk of those measures sounding hollow coming from the Macron government?
Sure. I mean, the voters on the left who don't like Macron, and there are many of them, will say that anything that Macron promises to help everyday people is just a technocratic sham. I think that's unfair. Frankly, I think if you look at what Macron did during the COVID crisis, he gave enormous and quick and effective support for small businesses, for salariés. It was a success story that is, I don't think he's received enough credit for. But I think Nupes really has a fundamental choice, because based on where the polls are today, no party will have an absolute majority, and Nupes will be the second largest, or maybe the largest, but no party will have the absolute majority. So the question is, what kind of opposition to Emmanuel Macron is Nupes going to be? And unfortunately, Mélenchon has spent his entire political career making beautiful speeches in the opposition. And we have to say it, he's never governed a thing. Right? He's represented the people in his circonscription in Marseille. He has never been a responsible member of any government. He has railed with beautiful speeches from the left, but never actually taken part in governing.
He's been minister. He's been minister in the Jospin government.
In the Jospin government.
Yes.
So it's been maybe 20
junior
years.
minister in the Jospin government.
So let's say in the last quarter century, Mélenchon has not done any real governing for the last 25 years or so. Now, if he remains the head of this coalition, the question is, will they only play the role of spoiler? Or will, on these social questions of cost of living and on the ecological questions, where there is a lot of common ground between what Macron says he wants to do and what Nupes says they want to do, will Nupes be able to actually make Macron go further against climate change, further for a strong Europe that protects consumer rights, that protects human rights? They could play a very constructive role. Or will they just say whatever Macron says, we're against it? Because that's been what Mélenchon has done for the last 5 years, and I don't think it's what France wants for the next 5 years.
Charlotte Mavier, you wanna butt in here?
Yes, I'd like to, because of course I agree that Emmanuel Macron's government has done a lot during the COVID crisis. But let's not forget that actually student poverty has increased hugely during that time, and that Emmanuel Macron and his majority in parliament have refused to give any social benefits for young people under 25 on numerous occasions. No support for people under 25 and no extra occasional support for students. And also in terms of the way he supported businesses, yes, that's true, and we have to acknowledge that. But he also, for example, agreed to lend 15 billion to Air France to save the aviation sector, which of course we needed to do in terms of employment, etc. But he did that with absolutely no environmental and social conditions. It's a missed opportunity. We need to ensure that when the state and when the government lends or does public purchases, that we actually have conditionalities around that, and that we ensure that environmental and social criteria are incorporated within that, because it's a new direction that we need to take. The IPCC report has said to us we have 3 years to act. So I think there's been a lot of missed opportunities, and there are also a lot of people who have suffered actually, because the 5% of the poorest people have seen their pouvoir d'achat, their cost of purchase, go down by 0.5. Purchasing power, exactly, has gone down by 0.5%. So a lot of people have been left behind. And so I think there is a huge demand now for some kind of change that takes people's living conditions, and also that takes into account the future of our planet and of us within it into account.
Max Bégon, in the time it took to get the left alliance to come together, in the meantime, the far right has actually built itself into a potent political force by taking on these traditionally left issues of cost of living. And we saw Marine Le Pen run on that particular point of her campaign throughout the campaign. What do you see the National Rally's role on this debate?
Well, I think our role is to make the voice of French people heard, and it's unlikely we'll have enough MPs to weigh really on the legislative debate. But I think our role throughout the years has been to promote the ideas of the French people and to weigh on the government, not through legislative participation, but rather by making sure that if they don't listen to the French people, they will pay the price in the polls. And there has been a general disconnect between the ecological ambitions of Mr. Macron and of Mr. Mélenchon and the factual reality of energy prices going up. And I think it's something we've been campaigning for, that you can't do the ecological transition against the French people. You have to do it with them. And so the message we're trying to take is that it's important that there is a discussion and consultation, and that the French people are involved in that process if it is to succeed. Because as we've seen in the Yellow Vest episode, when you don't do that, you can really quickly escalate into violence, and it's something we want to avoid.
Can I just say, as an American, how refreshing it is that no matter who, which party is talking, that we agree that climate change exists and that it's an urgent crisis. I mean, if we put aside ideology and what you say, what our friend from the National Rally and Charlotte said, there are so many practical, pragmatic things, opportunities, you said, that have been lost in past years that could be seized in the next 5 years if we let a little bit of the ideology and the bomb throwing to one side and focused on the practical measures that could make France a more energy independent, more renewable focused, but also more resilient and a more sovereign country. That would, I think, speak to a huge spectrum of the French people. It's a paradigm shift, right? And Macron was trying to exemplify that with his en même temps, speaking to both sides. He has personal weaknesses, but so do all of the national leaders. So does Marine Le Pen, so does Jean-Luc Mélenchon. I would much rather see folks like our guests here in charge of the lawmaking process than some of these people who have been in politics for decades, because I think that the younger candidates are the ones who are going to be bringing fresh ideas. If we can be a little bit more practical and a little bit less ideological, France can make so much progress that, frankly, in my country, in the US, we failed to do.
Richard?
Well, yeah, I'd like to come back to the election question. It's interesting that you've invited Charlotte and Max, because the results of the second round, especially for Nupes, will depend very much on the National Rally voters. What are they going to do if their candidate do not qualify for the second round? Are we going to see a protest vote? Are we going to see voters for the extreme right joining the Nupes to avoid Macron? So that's a question I think we should address, because then, both parties, the Nupes, which is not a party but a coalition, and the National Rally, have said after the election of President Macron that he is not completely legitimate because his voters were against the extreme right. Then you can address the same criticism, because if the second round result in the merging of two protest votes, then we have a problem.
Max Bégon, what would happen in a scenario where a Nupes candidate goes through the second round against an Ensemble candidate? Would the National Rally suggest voting for the Nupes candidate?
No, I think it's unlikely. I think the National Rally will call on voters to make their own decision. The reason being that Mr. Mélenchon has very clearly supported Mr. Macron in the second round. And so from our perspective, there are two sides of a similar approach to the political system.
Well, let's stay on the far right. They've been called the main political opposition during Macron's presidency. I mean, he was faced with Marine Le Pen in both his campaigns for president. Marine Le Pen's loss in the second round recently is leading to a period of reflection and questioning. Though, is it the end of the road for her? There's questions about whether she'll run again in 2027. Who will step in if she doesn't? Jordan Bardella has been taking more and more space in that area. And what to make of the rival far-right movement of Éric Zemmour, the Reconquête, Reconquest movement? We're seeing unity on the left of the spectrum, but all the way to the far right, relations between the National Rally and Zemmour's Reconquête don't seem warm at all. Let's listen in to Marine Le Pen speaking.
I saw Eric Zemmour's election platform, and I see it doesn't have a word about purchasing power. Not a word, not a line, not a word about purchasing power. So I can only conclude that on social matters, we have a distinct difference of views. He shows total disinterest for the daily life of the French.
Max Bégon, is there any chance of seeing Reconquête and the National Rally find some sort of common ground? And how do you explain these dissensions?
Well, I mean, it's just ideological difference. I mean, there are similar differences between the parties that are part of the Nupes. I don't know how they managed to put them aside, and I'm very curious to see what happens once we have a number of candidates elected which don't agree on very fundamental points. I think it will be interesting to watch. From our perspective, we are national rally, which means we are our goal is to rally all the people who believe in France. I think Mr. Zemmour is really building on the remains of the Republican Party, really, than rather taking from a national rally, because it's really a different electorate. And you can see in London, actually, because he got a higher score than the national rally, but I think it's just the makeup of the electorate, which is much more wealthy, has less day-to-day problems.
And would you say that Le Pen's, over the years, Le Pen's shift to more economic concerns, sort of making the National Front and now the National Rally a slightly more mainstream party, has actually opened the door for this new player coming to the right of it? And how does that play?
Yeah, so I was saying that I think the main movement that took place is that the Republican Party, which pretended to be a right-wing party, but in fact was very close to Mr. Macron, has ceased to exist. And Mr. Zemmour is more of I would say a liberal from an economic standpoint. And this is kind of clashing with current National Rally policies. So it makes it quite difficult to reach a common platform, because at the National Rally, we believe in a strong state that intervenes in the economy. We believe it's a big part of the way France has operated successfully in the past for building great projects with state involvement. We believe it's necessary to have a strategic involvement of the state, and it's not something Mr. Zemmour agrees with. Yeah.
Lex Paulson, you've seen Macron try to respond from challenges from both sides, and it's a bit of a delicate balancing act for him. How do you see this happening, developing over the next few days before the vote?
We're still living a little bit in the aftershocks of 2017. Where when En Marche, I remember this very strange period between the presidential and legislative elections, which is very, I think you could say it's unusual in the developed world to have this strange gap. And it was almost as if in 2017, well, Macron, who was, had started something completely new, there was a wave. There's not a wave anymore for En Marche. There's more of a sense of resignation among some electors that actually we would rather not talk about politics right now. Macron has won. That means stability. Stability is actually probably better than something revolutionary and disruptive. People on the left, on the other hand, are looking at this as an opportunity to really join as the opposition in the next government. I think both those things could happen, but I think a low turnout election, and again, as you said, 2017 was the first time in the Fifth Republic where fewer than half of the eligible voters turned out to vote in legislative elections. When I was born, it was something like 85%. In the 90s, it was 2/3, and now it's less than half. That's really dangerous for Macron, because in a low turnout election, this is where surprises can happen. This is where local strange issues can come to the fore, can throw an election what the Macron spokespeople called an industrial accident, meaning something totally unforeseeable. So I think this could actually be a surprise election, and maybe not in the way Macron would want. But I think that the probable outcome is that no party, no coalition has a majority, and that means the real choice that determines the next 5 years is what kind of opposition Nupes is going to be. I maintain that this is the real choice that will determine the next 5 years. Are they going to just be spoilers, or are they going to take a practical, pragmatic part in governing the country?
Lex Paulson, thank you very much for being with us on the France 24 debate. Same goes for Charlotte Mainviel, the Northern Europe candidate for Nupes, Max Begon, the UK representative for the National Rally, and you, Richard Verley, France and Europe correspondent for Blick. If you want to watch more of our debates, just go to our website and look at all the previous instances of that, and you can find us on podcasts as well. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Do stay tuned to France 24. We've got more news coming right up.